Education reform in Indiana is a lot like the state's ongoing effort to maintain and improve its highways. In both policy arenas, the goal is to get Hoosiers to their desired destinations, literally or figuratively, as quickly, as safely, and as efficiently as possible. Now, sometimes repairs or tweaks are in order. New asphalt here, an extra lane, or reconfigured interchange there. Other times, however, circumstances call for entirely new routes, and perhaps even the abandonment of old ones. Either way, controversy is all but guaranteed. Hi, I'm Jon Schwantes, and on this week's show, we'll offer a crash course on K-12 education reform. And be sure to pay attention, there might just be a pop quiz at the end of the show. Indiana Lawmakers, from the Statehouse to your house. Lawmakers increased base funding for K-12 education by $1.5 billion, or some 10%, compared with the preceding biennium. They eliminated textbook rental fees, allocated additional money for school security grants, took steps to offer more work-based learning opportunities for high school students and teachers, and dramatically expanded Indiana's controversial private school voucher program, already the largest in the nation. They also passed laws requiring schools to steer clear of human sexuality until grade 4, to alert the parents of students who want to adopt new nicknames or change pronouns, and to establish processes by which parents and community members can seek the removal of supposedly objectionable library materials. Although many school districts and teachers are still struggling to adjust to all of the measures enacted last year, no one could have, or at least should have, expected much of a lull in the consideration of education-related proposals this session. Responding to what they call a literacy crisis, leaders of the Republican supermajorities in the House and Senate want schools to get serious about holding back the estimated 1 in 5 third graders who flunked the statewide iRead reading test. Those lawmakers are also looking for ways to combat chronic absenteeism, which has spiked in Indiana and elsewhere in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic. Other bills introduced this session would ease some teacher licensing requirements, limit students' cell phone use in the classroom, and authorize public schools to appoint chaplains to counsel students and teachers. Finally, there's Senate Bill 255, which would fundamentally restructure the aforementioned recently expanded school voucher program, reminding us yet again that education is a work in progress and that any attempt to grade that progress can produce just one mark: I for incomplete. At the top of the show, I liken the push to improve Indiana schools to the effort to improve its highways. I cited a couple of similarities, but here's the biggest. By definition, neither the state school system nor its highway system will ever be, quote, done. For better or for worse, construction is always ahead. Joining me are 3 policymakers who are passionate about building a K-12 education system that gets Hoosiers where they want to go with as few potholes, detours, and lane restrictions as possible. I am pleased to welcome Republican Representative Bob Behning of Indianapolis, longtime chair of the House Education Committee, Dr. Katie Jenner, who, as Indiana's first appointed Secretary of Education, leads the Indiana Department of Education and chairs the State Board of Education, and Democratic Representative Ed DeLaney of Indianapolis, a minority member of that same education panel. Thank you all for being here. This will be a lively discussion.
Yes.
All right, teachers and educators are in the business of grading. Let's start with you, Secretary. What grade does the state of Indiana deserve right now in terms of its K-12 education system?
We'll start with an easy one, huh? So when we look at Indiana's data, Indiana typically performs above national average in math, typically between 10 and 15 in top states in the country. In reading, we are more statistically average. The challenge is our reading scores have continued to decline. So where we used to be ahead a decade ago, we're in the decline mode. So we have to overcome that and get back up.
We will be talking about certainly the literacy issue at the third grade level as we get into this, because that is one of the priorities for lawmakers. Yes. As you look at, I notice you haven't given me a grade yet, but I might come back to that. But are we heading this direction? Are we on the right track, the wrong track?
I think we are heading this direction, which is not...
For those listening on the radio, she's sort of maybe clearing the trees at the end of the runway.
And we have to go... Our challenge right now is we have to move faster in terms of the urgency of acceleration and moving up. And in terms of a grade, you're probably going to hold me to that. I'd say right now we are probably C plus B minus. We're a little bit above average when you look nationwide, but Indiana is absolutely capable, and we must be an A. And I know we can get there.
C plus B minus. Boy, tough grader than I
am
had.
a tough grader. I always was. Ask them that question.
I might never gotten into IU if you'd been in my grade school teacher. Bob Behning, you've been around in the General Assembly since '92, I believe. Longtime chair, as I noted in the introduction. A lot of the policy changes are your handiwork. You're the architect of many of them. Looking back, let's go to '92 as our benchmark. Are students in Indiana better off now or worse off than they were back then?
I would say probably better off. I think, unfortunately, though, the world's changed a lot since 1992, and we are much more a global economy. And so we're not just competing against other states, we're competing against the whole world. And what worries me and what I lose sleep over is some of the PISA results that just came out were 5 years behind the world in math. Now, Indiana, to Secretary Jenner's credit, we are actually ahead of a lot of other states, but we still, I think that as a country, we really need to embrace and have a higher level of respect for education and really try to move the ball forward in a much bigger way.
So you say we are better than 30 some years ago. If you had to identify one thing as the biggest contributor to the gains, and feel free to cite one of your own initiatives, because again, many of the changes bear your signature.
Well, in fairness, you're giving me credit for a lot, and I will have to tell you.
It could be blamed too, though, depending on how.
True, it could be very well. I actually think I still have been in the minority more than I've been the majority. So, I was in the minority a long period of time. I look to things like school choice as an opportunity to start reflecting and creating more competition among all of our schools. So I don't look at it as a single source that's going to change the world, but I also think that it does create some synergies and some motivation for all of us to be more reflective and try to really drive towards performance. And I think you see that in some communities where you have significant choice, where all of a sudden we've got public schools trying to get traditional public schools out here trying to advertise, get kids because of their moving towards higher level quality. But it would be the one thing that I think you could. I did have direct responsibility.
I was going to say that one is your handiwork, and we can certainly talk about that.
That one, I think the school choice thing makes some politicians feel good. I don't think it makes much difference to our overall achievement, especially because we don't have any mechanism to enforce excellence on certainly on the private schools or the voucher schools, and we don't have, in my view, very good mechanisms to enforce excellence on the charter schools. They're altogether too independent. So I'm not sure that that's the solution.
So I'll ask you the same question: Are schools better? This is my homage to
No,
Ronald Reagan.
I don't
Are
think
we better
they're
off today.
I don't think they're particularly better. I think that the secretary has it right that we're doing better in some areas, especially math, and I think we're focused on the right issues. The problem is this goes back to Mitch Daniels here. We keep trying to reinvent or find some mysterious secret sauce that we can put out there that's going to make things go better. Well, that's not how it works. Education, in my view, is just hard, grinding old work, and the number one component is have good teachers, and we don't put the emphasis we need to on teacher recruitment, teacher education. The departments of education in our universities are not as strong as they need to be, so we start with that problem. So I think we need to pay more attention to qualifying teachers, getting them in, getting young people to want to do that job. If we get that done, everything else, in my view, will begin to flow.
Well, teacher salaries was a big initiative.
It's been a big plus. We've moved in the right direction on that. Some of us, like myself, have yelled about it, and there's been some response. I think that's healthy. That will help on that front. And I think part of it is we got to make a commitment to education. There's too much of this debate that we're having about whether everybody should have a career education, a technical vocational education, or go to college. We need to figure out how to do two things at once. Anybody who's capable of college and wants to go there, we got to encourage them. Anybody who doesn't want to do that, has some other abilities, we got to encourage them. I think we're moving in that direction, but it's a huge task.
Well, now we've had foreshadowing of all the things I want to talk about: school choice, work-based curriculum, and so forth. But Secretary, let me ask you again of this notion that things haven't had a chance to settle. The dust hasn't settled. I mean, do we have reform fatigue when it comes to education here? I can't think of a governor back to the first one I covered, Bob Orr, with A+ program for educational excellence that hasn't stressed education reform. And sometimes that meant tests, this year you take one test, next year we're changing it, they were changing it. Do we need to just stop and take a deep breath, do you think?
I don't think as a state, I think it would be dangerous if we did halt, because then we would plateau. I think the opportunity right now is to really identify, because you can't boil the ocean or we're gonna get nothing done. We have to identify exactly what our focus areas are. So, for example, that foundation has to be strong. Reading, STEM. Then you look at the high school space. Indiana is leading the nation in thinking about how to redesign and improve high school so that children, quite frankly, their fire of purpose is lit. And to the points being shared, that regardless if they go to employment, enrollment, or enlistment leading to service, they have options, and that transition is starting much before they walk across a graduation stage. So focus on the foundations and then make sure that high school design best sets the child up for success in their future. That's the key focus that we're after.
Well, I'm sure somebody who wants to get to that A in that glide path or
Yes.
that takeoff
I'm
a
very
little bit
competitive. We're gonna get there.
quickly, you'll like the fact that the pace of change has been significant. And we can look at school choice, revisiting that issue. 2011 is when you first introduced that. I think it was designed.
Well, actually, you go back to charter schools, it's all the way back in
2000.
Right.
Yeah.
But with the so-called voucher program, which
Right.
I know that's the shorthand certainly. 2011 started with maybe 4,000 students, I think was the target. And every couple of years since, it's the parameters have changed, the qualifiers have changed, thresholds for salary. Now, essentially, everybody can go to. I mean, is that the way this is supposed to be? And if so, how do you feel about it's not going to happen this session, but Senate Bill 255, which will essentially take everything you've done and say, that's great, but now we're going to go a different direction.
I mean, Senate Bill 255 side, I think that clearly there's been a lot of motivation in the General Assembly, at least among both the House and Senate, to look at universal choice and continue to. I think that I would assume that next session that would likely be the case, where we just make it available to everyone.
So the 10% who are too wealthy to get a voucher will get it. I don't think that does a darn thing for anybody except those people.
Well, it'll be more than 10%, presumably. We had 30% growth last year, even before
but there's only 10% of the population
I think it's
makes
even
too
smaller
much.
than that.
Yeah, that makes too much.
It's smaller even than that. I think 97% of students qualify.
But going back to, I would have to agree with some of Ed's opening remarks in terms of teacher quality too. I think we all have to keep our eye on the ball and really focus. School choice, as I've always looked at it as being a lifesaver to a lot of parents who have kids in a school that may not be meeting their needs. We heard yesterday on the floor of the House about an individual who had, one of our colleagues who had a kid who had autism and was struggling, and he had the resources to move his kid. But I think it's an opportunity to kind of send a message to the system that we all have to get focused on getting better. But I do believe, like Secretary Jenner says, we do need to focus a lot. And reading is clearly something, it's a foundation building skill. I'm so excited that we have this Lilly Endowments money has really helped, I think, catapult us into leadership across the country. I think focus on STEM is going to continue to be something that's definitely necessary. As I said earlier, we're 5 years behind the Chinese on terms of math performance. So I think we have to work, all of us have to work together. It is not something that one of us can do individually, and I don't think school choice in and of itself is going to change the world. I think it's going to require all of us working collaboratively,
I think the big change I see coming, that I see behind these new bills about literacy and so forth, the big change is we're getting down to where we virtually have to identify the individual kid who has a problem. And so if we have 20% who aren't reading, that's rough. That would be 15 or 16,000 kids in first, second, third grade who aren't reading where they should be. We're moving towards trying to identify each one of those kids and assign a coach to them. I don't think we have the capacity to do that. That's one of my great fears. I think it's a great ambition, but I don't think we have the structure, the capacity, or the cadre of teachers to do this. And I think what we do is we like to invent these reforms, but then we don't measure what they achieved, and then we abandon them. The worst example is the testing, where we've stumbled. I think we're finally getting somewhere on testing. I think we're going to.
I think we've had one now in place for a couple of years.
We got the SAT in high school is a very smart idea. You're paying attention to this PISA, this international test, or this NAEP test. So I think we've identified.
They are getting along, aren't they?
I think we've identified these tests that are useful, but now we've got to build them into our system and get the public to understand them. I think that's absolutely critical. If the public doesn't know what they're about, they're going to be kidding about I-STEP again. I'm sick of hearing about I-STEP. I'm sure you are too. Whatever it is this week, call it what you want.
Well, whether or not the mechanics are in place and all the sort of the niceties, to the Secretary's point about the speed with which the state needs to move. If we have a literacy crisis now, and 1 in 5 third graders apparently can't pass the I-read exam,
Yes.
and we're also dealing with chronic absenteeism, the T word, truancy, which I hadn't heard that word since my childhood. I mean, does something have to happen this session? Obviously, there is legislation moving on the reading front. How significant is that?
Something has to happen this session. It's not an option for our state. Coming in, and our team came in January 2021, which was right after that initial COVID. We started with let's understand where we are data-wise, and then let's immediately get after it. You heard about the Lilly Endowment funding and all of the partners. In Indiana, we have a $170 million investment on our teachers because, to both of their points, quality teachers matter as much as anything for a child's education. So with that investment, the next step is, okay, what about the student intervention? So to Representative DeLaney's point, if right now at the end of third grade, which is a pivotal time for a child, we have 14,000 children approximately in 2023 who were not able to read by the end of the year. About 6,000 got a good cause exemption, meaning they most commonly had a special education IEP or maybe were an English learner. And then for the most part, most of the students, about 7,400, moved forward to fourth grade, not able to read. So the goal,
this is today
in Indiana. The goal of the discussion at the General Assembly is early intervention. It's how do you get to the child at kindergarten, at first grade, at second grade. Let's leverage the current assessment, the current funding, and support our schools and our teachers to make sure kids can read.
Given that if the problem seems to be creeping up at that, or at least is manifesting itself at that early grade, and yet you look at a lot of the legislation that the state has enacted in recent years, it's about secondary education, making sure that people get the apprenticeships or the internships. Is enough being done for those early years?
I clearly am a strong advocate of where we're moving right now. I think the science of reading. Yes, I am saying
we
yes.
need to focus. He's saying yes. We need to focus on those little kids.
The science has changed over the last. We now know how kids actually learn to read in a very effective way. I think what has happened over time is, clearly technology has moved. We can tell by brain science exactly where we need to be in terms of teaching that. And unfortunately, we kind of gotten off he and I have talked about this a long time because we're gray-haired guys in the room, that we learned teaching, we're taught phonics. Now, phonics isn't just the only, science of reading isn't just phonics, it's fluency, context, all of it. But clearly, we've moved away from that, and kids have struggled because of it. And that's, I think, something it's a foundational building skill that we have to have in place. When Dr. Bennett was Secretary of Education, or Superintendent of Public Instruction, I remember the takeover schools we had, like Manual High School on the South Side. One of the reasons those schools was taken over was because kids were walking into high school with a 3rd to 6th grade reading level. You want to know why we have truancy issues? If you walk into a high school environment and you have a 3rd grade reading level and now you're giving a 10th, 11th, 12th grade text, you're lost. And it's like, why should I show up? I'm going to drop out, et cetera. So I think we have to focus on foundation of reading for sure.
And cursive writing, obviously. No, that's just an inside joke.
One of the big concerns I have is what I call this nasty term that I have, the education industrial complex. We have all these groups who want to make money off of it. That scares me. I want to use our teachers, our teacher education programs to get people prepared. We're creating all these new categories, literacy coaches and so forth. We've got ability to contract outside. It all makes me very nervous. I like the core group, the superintendent, the
You
principals,
don't like
the
the
teachers.
profit. You don't
I don't
think
like these people
Is there a
coming in.
place for the profit incentive in public education?
I don't see much for it. I really don't. I see a silly example this week. We used to have release time. It was understood you could go 2 hours of religious study. Now we got an organization, a not-for-profit, that gathers the kids together, gathers the churches together, comes over and tells the superintendent when they want to have classes. What are we doing? We let too many people into our buildings and too many people into our wallets. And that's what concerns me.
With all due respect, the Indiana model for supporting our teachers is the $170 million investment works directly with the schools. They hire their literacy coach, and the literacy coach is truly there to work with the teachers, to review the data, to be that immediate support. It's what we saw in the state of Mississippi, the Mississippi Miracle. They went from last in the nation to now middle of the pack. Now, we're still higher than them with reading, but we're sure not jumping over 25 states to get to the middle of the pack. We're decreasing in reading. So I think we have to learn from what they did. So those literacy coaches are really intentional.
If they're part of the system, that's fine.
Yeah, they are.
But
They are.
Where we got off base on the reading was, and the right wing might like this, some academics came up with an idea that there might be a better way, to teach kids to read. Then some publishers, educational entrepreneurs, put together books of this new method, got it pushed out through the system. So I think education is pretty darn basic. And this constant change and reform and all this is not getting us anywhere.
We can agree on that, by the way. Balanced literacy is what he's referring to. Not science of reading is the movement today, based on the science. Balanced literacy, if you listen to Soul to Story podcast, really shows our challenge and what we have to overcome.
But we have to be careful that we don't make another similar mistake.
Yes,
That's my big concern.
Well, with the agenda is core skills,
right.
Math
Absolutely.
and that was what leadership talked about, caucus leadership this session. And yet we see, as we always do, other bills. As chairman of the Education Committee, is it frustrating to know that the eye is on the ball of third grade reading, for instance, but now we're talking about the ability to hire chaplains to serve as counselors, or the notion of having extra time off for religious instruction, or cell phone usage. Lots of different. I guess you said we can do more things. You do multiple things at once. So I guess this is an example of that.
I think if you could isolate and say, what Ed brings up to the table is the fact that we changed the word from may to shall in terms of providing an opportunity for
That's
kids.
on the education.
How
about chaplains, for instance?
Chaplains, I did not hear that bill. So
Thank you.
If that bill is
one
out
of your
there,
best
I'm not
decisions
aware.
of the year.
But the reality is a kid is not just reading is not the only thing that excites kids. And I think you have to look at the whole child. You can't just say, all we're going to do is focus on reading, because if the kid doesn't feel a sense of fulfillment, doesn't feel engaged, it's strong. If a kid comes to school hungry, there's a number of things that impact learning. So you cannot say it's just one thing. And that's why we don't look, Education Committee looks at a variety of things. Cell phones, you bring up a great point. There's a lot of educators who would actually tell you that it is a huge distraction in terms of learning. And whether it be a third grader in reading or a high schooler who has access to social media, there are a number of impacts that actually impact the quality of learning that
but are we the ones that decide that? That's what gets
Cell phones do
the
seem to be a unifier here to a certain extent. Is that something? And is that the kind of thing that people can say, I don't understand all this science of reading and stuff, but boy, I know cell phones can be a distraction. Kids are looking at porn.
Why is the legislature deciding that?
Well, should
Sorry. What do we know? What do we know?
I tell you, part of the feedback that we hear from schools a lot is that cell phones are absolutely a challenge for schools to manage in terms of even if they have rules where you keep them in the locker, they still have them out and they're filming this and that they shouldn't, causing social media drama. So I think from the educator standpoint, we're hearing a lot of support for the willingness for the General Assembly to remove a barrier to educating Indiana students.
Is that they want us to take the heat? I don't mind.
I think if
taking
you
a
take
heat.
the arrows,
if that's what it's all
go
about.
on and do it.
I think the teachers can say, get rid of your phones right now.
Kids, we're almost out of time.
Right.
I'm going to make you clean the erasers if you run long here. Thank you, though. I know we could talk a lot longer. This has been a great discussion. We have to do more because education is where it begins and ends. Again, my guests have been Republican Representative Bob Behning of Indianapolis, Indiana Secretary of Education Dr. Katie Jenner, and Democratic Representative Ed DeLaney of Indianapolis. And time now for my weekly conversation with Ed Feigenbaum, publisher of Indiana Legislative Insight and its sister newsletter, Indiana Education Insight, both part of Hannah News Service. Ed, we covered a lot of territory and even the history, but fast forward to this session. Give me a lightning round. You can even do it alphabetically if you want, in true education fashion. What bills do we really need to pay attention to?
From A to V, yeah. We've got anti-Semitism. We've got the age of school starting. We've got cursive handwriting. We've got chronic absenteeism. We've got chaplains in schools. We've got reading improvement. We've got
Wait, you just went from C to R. There's probably something in the middle there, but there's a lot percolating for a session that wasn't supposed to have much going on.
Yeah, and that's interesting because at the beginning it was, yes, we're not going to do a whole lot this session. We don't need to do a whole lot this session, but education is really taking the spotlight.
What's the most meaningful of the A through V? What has the most significance?
Well, certainly the reading improvement, and I think we talked in our leadership panel show that it was interesting that they're not letting the ground dry or underneath them on that, because they did pass the Science of Reading bill recently, but they're not taking time to see how it takes effect before they make changes again, because they are really concerned about that. But one thing that we've not really talked about today was the bigger thing of the next transition into colleges and the transition into the workforce. And
which may or may not involve college, I guess, is the
right,
whole
and that's
model.
the key. You know, we're talking about potentially repurposing the Franco-Bannon grants, the 21st Century Scholars Program, and saying, okay, you can use these toward workforce improvement type things, career development programs, and you can also potentially get, as the governor was pushing in his State of the State address, associate's degrees or credentials for people who haven't fulfilled the full 4-year credit regimen for state colleges and universities.
Do you think we, as a state, are looking at this as the whole range that as from pre-K up to post-secondary education and beyond, or do we handle it piecemeal?
Well, we've been handling it piecemeal, and I think we're trying to look at things a little bit more comprehensively now. But we're still dealing with each of these things, in pieces. Whether it's chaplains in schools, which I think may have a tough time in the House, oddly enough, or whether it's policies on things like cell phones in schools. We're really not taking a big picture approach to some of those things, those policy things, but we are on some of the major things like reading improvement and credentialing.
Well, Ed, I can always count on you to give us a good education. As always, I appreciate your insight.
Thank you, John.
Mahatma Gandhi observed, "It is health that is real wealth and not pieces of gold or silver." True enough, but there's also no disputing that gold and silver, in the form of adequate state funding, can make it easier to avoid or recover from illness. We'll examine the healing power of money on the next Indiana Lawmakers. Well, that concludes another edition of Indiana Lawmakers. I'm Jon Schwantes, and on behalf of commentator Ed Feigenbaum, WFYI Public Media, and Indiana's other public broadcasting stations, I thank you for joining us, and I invite you to visit WFYI.org for more Statehouse news. Until next week, take care.